Okay.
Aloha and welcome back. This is Diane Big, and on this episode, I'm excited to introduce Misty Tyme. She is a forgiveness and expectation expert, and I love that we're going to be talking about forgiveness because this is a little piece in the book that I wrote. But I want Misty to introduce herself and speak a little bit more about what she does. Misty?
Hi, I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk about forgiveness. It is my favorite subject. I am a death doula. I am an interfaith reverend, and I'm a forgiveness and expectations expert. So lots of people ask me, what the heck is a death doula? Well, most women know about birth doulas. They help people come into the world. Well, I help people leave this life and move to their next life. Also, I help the people who are left behind, who are stuck in that grief and that loss and that sadness due to the person who has left, and they feel like their connection is been severed. I help them remember their connection with that loved one is always here, and that the person is just, oh my goodness, they're still with you, but we just need to talk differently than we did before. It's not like you can just pick up the phone and have a two-way, right? So you gotta think a little bit differently. So I help people with grief, loss, and I help the person who is dying have the best end of life that they are looking for.
And that's a beautiful gift to give someone when they're ready to pass, so they can actually let go, and help those that stay behind. Because I think we hold on to a lot of emotions, we hold on to a lot of grief, and it keeps us feeling stuck. And we can create symptoms in our body. So thank you for doing what you do, because I think it's amazing. As we were talking before, I actually created a grief hypnosis because I think a lot of people right now are not only grieving people that they've lost during this virus, but they're grieving people that they've lost before, and also grieving the fact that their life is different. And we have to re-experience, how are we going to de-stress, and how can we live in this new way of living right now?
Yeah, we are definitely grieving the loss of our normal, right? And we have fear of the unknown. You know, we turn on the news and things are just looking so, well, first of all, try not to turn on the news. But ultimately, we are worried about our loved ones that we can't see, maybe an elderly family member that we can no longer visit because of the threat of COVID, but also in our own life. Like if you go to the grocery store, are you being exposed? There's this little bit of fear that's added that is affecting our ability just to move forward. But good news, we're human beings who've been through a lot, and our history shows that we love to overcome, and we will overcome this also. It has to do with our inner hearts and minds coming together, being wise and loving, and moving forward in that loving way. Now, when it comes to forgiveness, oh my goodness, what does forgiveness have to do with this, right? Well, lots of times we have to forgive a lot of people for the way they are showing up in the world, because it's kind of irritating. I mean, have you been on social media lately? Like, people are yelling at each other for wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, voting this way or don't vote this way. And everybody believes that there's like a conspiracy here or there, but it makes us very anxious. So forgiveness is definitely important right here. And so is expectations, because we have so many expectations, not only of ourselves, but of others, our society, our government, our world. And when they don't meet those expectations, we pick up unforgiveness. And that is what I teach on how to feel better, how to forgive, how to adjust your expectations, and to understand that people show us who they are. Believe them.
That's so beautiful. And yes, forgiveness is a huge part of healing and understanding what's going on in your physical body. One of the things that I always talk about in my book is that the symptoms that we experience, whether it's stomach ache or a headache, there is a physical inflammation that's happening physically to your body, but there's an emotional root. There is something down there that you need to dig and understand and begin to forgive. And forgiveness is a huge part of it. I love to use Ho'oponopono as part of my forgiveness, and also just visualizing. So today, this morning, I had some stomach ache. I listened to the grief meditation that I created, and I actually found that there was an emotion connected to that symptom, and allowed myself to release it. So tell us a little bit more about your forgiveness algorithm, because I think it's amazing that you figured this out for yourself.
Well, I, like you, worked in the medical field, and then I was in corporate for a long time, and we love algorithms. An algorithm is just simply a step-by-step process to solve a problem, kind of a step-by-step to get you through something and to an end result. Well, in my case, unforgiveness was my problem, anger, pain, sadness, and I wanted to feel better. So when I realized what forgiveness really is and is not, and was able to get through that journey myself, I realized that there was actually a step-by-step process that I could help others feel better by doing the step-by-step process in the forgiveness algorithm. And so that's how it showed up, though I kind of believe that it was a little bit of a God download. And it was a moment, it was definitely a moment. And that I was able to do it that way so people could see that, yes, you can actually do something. You can do something to feel better. Like you mentioned, there's meditations, all that. I even talk about that in my book. That's in my toolbox. So there's a lot of different things that we can do, and some work for some people and other people need something else. So I give you a whole bunch of different avenues to do that. But first of all, I do clear up the myths about what forgiveness really is and is not.
I love that, and I think yes, people need a step-by-step tool, a little bit of a guide to instruct them on where they need to go. Which is why, in my book, I actually call mine a technique. So I call it the Unleash technique, and one of the steps involves forgiveness. So I think it's great to give people different modalities for them to look and find other coaches and people that inspire them, so that they can find their path to understanding what's going on in their body. Now, I read something and I wanted to dig a little deeper. So I believe that our world is very cynical and it's filled with a lot of stress and pain. And I know we've experienced it, and there's a lot of negativity around us right now in the middle of COVID-19. How would you say forgiveness has transformed that experience for some of your current clients during this COVID crisis?
Well, it's even for myself. I've had to use my own stuff on myself. Um, ultimately, um, everybody is coming from different space and place. So when I talk about expectations, I also talk about belief systems. We gain our own belief systems by a few different ways. First of all, how old we are, female, male, where we grew up, what country are we born in, what religion did we practice, what religion do we practice now, what we do for a living. I mean, you name it, all of that forms our belief systems. So when any of that is shook up, we react, right? If it doesn't fit what we know as comfortable, right, we tend to react. And that's what you see a lot of going on right now, whether it be politics or how people view medicine or how people view viruses, or, you know, there a difference in a person who works as a scientist at the CDC versus somebody else who's never picked up a science book ever. How they believe can be very different. It has to do with their experiences. So what we tend to do is kind of yell at each other until we get them to believe the way we want them to believe. Ultimately, no one's ever yelled at me for 20 minutes and had me change my mind, or make 10 posts about something and made me change my mind. The only way that I know how to change an experience is to have a positive experience with someone else, or a negative experience. The more negative experiences that you have will cement you in your belief system. You're not going to open up to somebody's way of life or the way they think, or even wonder about it if you think, I want to use the word like crazy, if you're like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, they need to believe the way I believe. It's because we kind of get defensive, right? Just like an argument with two people where we get louder and louder and louder and louder, and in turn we are not able to really express our heartfelt experience. And that's what people need to be talking about right now. Why do you believe the way you believe? Let me tell you why I believe the way I believe. It's not that I'm trying to convince you, it's that I'm trying to show you that my belief systems come from my space and place. Now, recently I worked with a client that had a huge argument with a friend, a dear friend. And because of that, they're not speaking anymore. And it has to do with all the stuff that's going on. They just, and believe it or not, they were actually saying very similar things. They were just saying it differently. But they were both being so loud that neither one could hear the other. And guess what? They thought they disagreed, but they actually agreed on more than they didn't agree on. So the problem is that you need to understand that people's belief systems come from their space and place. And where does forgiveness come with that? It's about expectations. You really need to shift your expectation. When somebody is telling you something, you need to understand that this is their path, their place. So if you want to forgive them for, I don't know, not believing the way you believe, if you were able to shift your expectation because you understood they came from a different way of thinking, their experiences are different, their growing up experiences, their political views are different, then you might soften how you feel about them. You'll be a little less angry because you'd understand where they're coming from a little more. And that is how we forgive. Some people do not have the will or the skill to meet your expectation. And this client, her friendship is over with this person as the one that she used to know because she doesn't feel safe anymore. But she's no longer as angry as she was because she can remember that this person comes from a different space and place. Her growing up was very different than her best friend. And because of that, she has actually empathy for her. She feels sad for her. She feels like, oh, she kind of wants to hug her and make her feel better, even though they still don't agree.
Yeah, and it makes sense that it may take some time for them to create a new relationship if the
Mhm.
relationship comes back, because they both need to re-experience that situation again and work through the forgiveness together in order to be able to build something new in the process. So thank you for sharing that.
Exactly.
Like one of the things that
Yeah.
I
Well, it's exactly what you're saying is that they do need to re-experience. But I would also say something else you can do with forgiveness is forgiveness is actually a tool that we've been given, divinely given, to keep ourselves safe. We can look at a situation differently. We can forgive the person, understand that they're coming from their viewpoint, their space, their place. But if they have destructive behavior, abusive behavior, you can use forgiveness. And I say, love them with a 10-foot pole. You can let it go, let them be over there, and you can still love them, but you don't have to invite them over for dinner.
Oh yeah, you need to create boundaries where you know you need boundaries. That's one of the other chapters that I talk about is that boundaries are so important. And knowing that there are two sides to every story. And sometimes we need to forgive the other person in the process as we are forgiving our own selves, because we take on all these emotions, all these things, and they fester inside our body, creating symptoms. So a big part is to re-experience that hurtful situation, that hurtful confrontation, and begin to forgive from that point and understand that they do have a right to have their own opinions, and their opinions come from where, you know, what they learned, their self-limiting beliefs and everything that they experienced in life. And if you choose that this is someone you want to continue to create a relationship with, then it's now we build a new relationship. We create new boundaries and expectations for each other.
Exactly. And you can have an expectation conversation. You can say, this is my expectation here. This is, and you can put boundaries of whatever. I expect you to show up on Thursdays with cupcakes. And they're like, hold it, I can't meet that expectation. I'm not going to bake you cupcakes and I can't show up on Thursday. It's like, oh, really? So the fact is you can clarify expectations in relationships. And I highly recommend everybody do this in all of their relationships, whether it be a love relationship, friend relationship, a business relationship, so that your expectations are very clear, because then you can go from that point. It's not a surprise, right? If I showed up at your house on 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, your expectation would be like, hey, I'm in my pajamas. What are you doing here? And my expectation was like, well, I thought I could show up anytime. Is because we never had that conversation, right?
Oh, it's so important to have a conversation and speak up for yourself. Because I come from the, like not the loud person. I was that kind of girl that would hold in all her emotions and then they would get trapped in my body, thus developing chronic illness. And I know how important it is to speak up for myself and to set my expectations and create those boundaries now. so that I don't continue to take on these emotions and these symptoms. And I can empower people to create better relationships with me.
I agree with you. So in my book, I talk about this. I talk about the crack hurt around the world, which is my broken back. I broke my back about 12 years ago, and I've had lots of major back surgeries. And I was in a random therapy session, and I talk about therapy in my book and how important it is. But I was in a therapy session, and this therapist actually said to me, you know, this did not have to happen to you. I said, excuse me? And she just pointed out that sometimes we put so much on our backs. So I was still holding this emotion and anger to the part of my life that I felt heavy. I was trying to control everything and hold on so tight to control. And when I broke my back, oh my gosh, it was out of my control. The pain, all the things. I did all the research. I tried to avoid back surgery, but ultimately I had to have it. But the point was I was trying to control everything, and in turn I was holding myself so much tighter than understanding letting go of that, and then being thankful for all my other body parts that work just fine, by the way. I was like able to release some of that pressure that I was putting on my back. And so I totally agree with you that our emotions come out physically, and that there are symptoms that we can help ourselves with by letting go, forgiving ourselves, forgiving others for that deep emotion that we are holding. We're holding it. It's heavy, right? Have you ever had the really heavy feeling on your chest? It's grief and sadness because you wished somebody could do better and be better in your life, or even yourself. So those are definitely physical symptoms of an emotion that we are holding in our hearts, minds, and souls.
That's beautifully said. And it even happens, like, not only your injury, which is a huge injury, but it can happen with minor things. I mean, you could stub your toe in the middle of thinking a negative thought and not realize that the reason you stubbed your toe is because you were stuck in this negative space. But I've experienced it over and over again. And one of the injuries that I had was I tore my ACL. And in the moment that that was about to happen, it was me doubting myself that I could actually make that turn without hitting the median, and progressively ended up tearing it and requiring surgery. But I know that it was that negative thought, that negative emotions that you keep in that kind of get you stuck and create these symptoms. To then it's a wake-up call. Now it's something I need to address because now I have this injury that needs to be worked on.
Exactly. And I mean, think of headaches. Who hasn't had a tension headache or a migraine? And it's, yeah, exactly. So we have to think about, for me, my headaches are caused because I swear I leave my shoulders in my ears, like they're up here all the time. And I have to remember to breathe and let that out. And so that my body can react to the calmness. That fight or flight is on overdrive, and I need to calm down that fight or flight and that response. But it's hard because then I beat myself up. Oh, you're taking on too much. Oh, you're thinking about this too much, all that kind of thing. And that's where self-forgiveness comes in. Because remember, you're human, just like me. Like, we all do it to ourselves. But you have the power. I call it the yellow brick road. Dorothy started on the yellow brick road, and she ran into lions and Tin Man and flying monkeys. But ultimately, she had the power the whole time to go home. We have the power within our hearts and minds to take a breath, to calm down, to say no and not overextend ourselves, and still be kind, by the way. You can still state your political everything online, but be kind. Explain why you feel the way you do, because that will help reduce all that anger and tension that's going to come at you. People are more apt to want to know why you think the way you do, and maybe help them clarify a few points, and maybe you can learn from them. But ultimately, you're so right. The mind-body connection, so important.
It is a huge important thing. And I love that you brought up the stress response, because that is basically what I teach people is how do we shut off that stress response? How do we stop that pattern? Because everyone has their own pattern, even migraines. It's your body's reaction to stress. And How can you use some simple strategies to work on that physical and inflammation and stress and forgive yourself for taking on these emotions? So thank you for sharing that. Now I want to know something more before we finish about this death doula and what exactly you do, because we have about 5 minutes before we wrap up.
Okay. So I work with hospice organizations. I actually teach hospice providers how to facilitate a forgiveness conversation at end of life. Because face it, at end of life is when everything becomes hyper-focused, and no longer are we caring about our waist size or how dirty our house is or our job. We are deeply concerned about our personal and interpersonal relationships. So that's when you hear most often people say, I wish I could forgive my uncle for the abuse I suffered, or I wish I could forgive my ex, or I wish my kids would forgive me for being an alcoholic. Or, you know, those are the things that you hear, and that's a perfect time to instill what forgiveness really is and is not, and how to help the people come together at the most important time of somebody's life. Most importantly, there's even a study that backs this up that shows that if a person is able to work through their unforgiveness at end of life, the people left behind have a better grief experience. And hey, I know that when my twin brother took his own life, I would have done anything to have a better grief experience because I was stuck in unforgiveness and in grief. If I could have had this conversation with him and kind of healed some of those long-term wounds and understood him a little bit more, it would have helped me get through that grief, that deep darkness that we have when we lose someone special in our life.
That's a beautiful gift. That's something that you do. Do you actually bring in like the person that they want to give forgiveness to? Do you bring them into a session?
If they allow that. So the issue with that is it's all about permission, right? But most importantly, I teach the people, even in separate situations, what forgiveness is and is not. It's not about forgiving and forgetting. It's not about letting somebody out of consequences or legal justice. It's really about shifting your expectations due to the person's inability to meet your expectations. Some people just don't want to, and some people can't. They don't have the skill. They either have, it could be because of addictions or lack of teaching, something like that. And because of that, even if they wanted to meet your expectation, be the best dad, husband, friend, brother, sister, but because of their own inabilities due to addictions or mental health issues or just plain old not able to do it, they just don't know how. The problem with that is then they can't meet your expectations and you're asking them to do it. So that's how we pick up unforgiveness. And so as soon as we're able to understand they can't meet our expectation, then you're able to shift your expectation of that person or even the situation. Also, a good apology. Face it, we all love them. They don't have a but in them, by the way. So I also help facilitate what a good apology looks like.
That's a beautiful way to end that someone, you know, for someone to experience this relief and this cleanse before they leave this world, and to create a better connection with those that are left behind. Because I think family, those that are close to us, are the ones that really trigger us the most, that really cause us to get upset and create these symptoms in our bodies. And I was looking at your website and intrigued. We only have about a minute left, but about your forgiveness class, about forgiving your family.
Oh, yes. So the two things I hear the most are how to forgive my ex and how to forgive my family. So I teach that. I go through the algorithm. I clear up those myths and misconceptions, and there's even flying elephants in the class, I promise. It's not a boring class at all. And I also give you a few things that you can do as you're on that journey. There's things I want you to do, questions I want you to answer that will help you shift your expectations of the other person.
Well, that sounds like a very, very awesome course. I think everyone needs to experience that forgiveness with their family, because those are the closest ones that really trigger the things that we're experiencing in our physical bodies. As we wrap up, Misty, let them know how they can find you, where they can follow you before we close out.
Okay, so Misty Tyme, and that's with a Y.com. So MISTY, and yes, it's really my name, mistytyme.com. You can find all the classes on there. You can find a whole bunch of free downloads, and also you can get a hold of me on all that lovely social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of that. Again, Misty Tyme. And you can email me from the site or even on Facebook and send me a message if you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Misty, for joining us today. And I hope everyone learned a little bit of insight about the importance of forgiveness to really heal their bodies. This is Diane Vic. Aloha.